Pigeons. They're the everyman's boring, forgettable animal, being common in practically every city around the world. It's very easy to pass them by and not give them any notice whatsoever. They're a fairly boring and common animal in most people's minds. But pigeons can be awesome. Welcome to the first installment of Do You Know Wildlife, where I, Matt, advocate for the most common riffraff animals you'd normally not care about and teach you some awesome facts along the way. Pigeons are the oldest example of domesticated birds, with records in Mesopotamian cuneiform and Egyptian hieroglyphic records mentioning their domestication. These records date back to at least 3000 BC, but research suggests that this domestication happened even earlier, as early as 10,000 years ago. This predates the domestication of the red jungle fowl, which would eventually become today's domesticated chicken, by at least 2000 years. This means pigeons were the bird of choice for early civilization for meat and other utilities. The pigeon we know today derives from the rock dove, which you can still find in the wild, though their gene pool has been somewhat tainted due to the prevalence of interbreeding with feral pigeons. Rock doves and other derivative species of pigeon have a sort of internal magnetic compass, allowing them to travel extremely long distances with great locational accuracy. This made them incredibly useful for communication between human settlements. In fact, we used pigeons for communication even in the last century, particularly during wartime. There are even pigeons that have received recognition for their service. In World War II, for example, 32 pigeons were awarded the animal equivalent of a Victoria Cross, the highest possible decoration of valor. One such example is the familiarly named G.I. Joe, who saved the lives of an entire village in Italy which had been recaptured by Allied forces, but was due to be bombed by air support. He delivered the information just as planes were preparing for takeoff, preventing the deaths of at least 100 soldiers. War pigeons weren't just for communication though. We started using them for reconnaissance in the First World War by attaching camera harnesses to them and having them fly between two locations. These harnesses would capture aerial photography along the way of strategically important locations and allow us to scout out targets well in advance without being discovered. Starting in the Second World War, however, this method became somewhat obsolete as the prevalence of aircraft allowed for human aerial reconnaissance. This wasn't the end for our pigeon spy friends though, as they were often taken into scout planes. Pilots would write down vital information and release the pigeons mid-flight, allowing for rapid communication of strategic intelligence without having to return to base. So next time you're learning about war, think just how many lives might be saved by pigeons. While communication was undoubtedly valuable, pigeons were also domesticated in part for their guano. Guano is, in plain terms, bird poop, and makes for a very effective fertilizer that was used for centuries up until we developed cheaper and more effective fertilizers. That's not all though. Pigeon guano, while being nitrogen-rich for fertilizer, also contains the chemical compound saltpeter. Why is this important, you ask? Well, saltpeter is one of the three major ingredients in gunpowder, meaning that yes, pigeons also supplied ammunition for the wars they participated in. At least, they did in earlier wars. We can synthesize saltpeter in labs now without their help, but back in the 16th century they were the UK's only source of saltpeter. Meaning, yes, the UK fought wars off the back of pigeon poo. Guano was so valuable, in fact, that armed city guards would sometimes be stationed to protect it before it was harvested. This guano, coupled with pigeons' tendencies to flock together and roost in close proximity to humans, eventually led to a sort of symbiotic relationship between man and bird. Pigeons benefited heavily from this relationship by receiving shelter from predators within the walls of towns and villages, allowing for their populations to increase rapidly. They became very accustomed to human presence fairly quickly, especially as people would feed them with spare grain, seeds, and corn. This is actually one of the reasons why pigeons today aren't very flighty compared to other birds, and you can walk straight through a crowd of them without them all taking off in fear. Humans benefited in a few ways from this relationship too. As populations increased, we gained access to more guano, as well as a new food source, pigeon meat. Pigeons lay around 24 eggs a year, averaging around 2 per month. While this might not seem like a lot at first, when you take into account the growing population size and lack of predators, this means there's a lot of eggs being laid and hatched. Because of this, pigeon populations were stable enough that poorer members of society could capture and eat them without much worry of damaging the ecosystem, though let's be honest, back in those days there wasn't too much consideration for that. So great, now we've established how important pigeons have been in human history. But they aren't used as a means of communication or a resource nowadays, so what's so special about them now? Well, pigeons are much more intelligent than people give them credit for. One common test of animal intelligence is the mirror test, where an animal will be placed in front of a mirror and tested to see if it can recognize itself. Few animals have been able to pass this test, even those we normally consider quite intelligent like dogs and cats have failed, but pigeons have been able to pass it. In the experiment, pigeons were trained to peck at a spot in order to receive a food reward, a fairly typical setup for intelligence testing. Once trained in this behaviour, they would have the spot placed somewhere on their body, and would only peck at it when they saw themselves in the mirror. The important detail about this test is that they pecked the spot on their own body, rather than pecking at the mirror itself, proving that the pigeons recognised that the mirror was a reflection rather than another pigeon in the test with them. This puts them in a category with great apes, elephants and dolphins in terms of intelligence. They've also been shown in other experiments to be able to recognise each letter of the alphabet, differentiate between photographs, as well as identify individual different humans within a photograph. That's a surprising amount of intelligence in that little bird brain. There are a few common misconceptions about pigeons that can give them a poor image, like the idea that they're dirty and carry disease. They get called winged rats in parts of Manhattan, for example. This is absolutely not the case. Pigeons are actually a remarkably clean animal. Even in winter when they can't get access to clean water, they've been known to use snow to groom themselves. The reason we think they're dirty is purely because they're a common urban animal, meaning they're often seen as pests. And sure, there's some maintenance that comes along with having a population of pigeons in your city, like cleaning up their guano and ensuring they don't make nests in troublesome locations, but that doesn't make them dirty or pests. Maintenance is just another part of city living. Pigeons aren't at fault here. One misconception that's actually quite harmful to pigeons is that feeding them bread is actually helpful. Bread can be quite harmful for pigeons because it has no real nutritional value for them, but is very filling. So if you like going out to the park to feed the pigeons, maybe try bringing a bag of mixed seeds instead. They provide much more nutrition for our feathery little friends. And if all that isn't enough, just wait until you see some of the fancy exotic breeds of pigeon that exist. I'll be showing a few in the background now as I talk a little bit about my plans for the channel and this new wildlife focused content. So it should go without saying that this is very different to the old content that's been posted on this channel back in 2014, and it should be no surprise that my interests have changed in regards to content creation. I live in the UK at the moment, and there's sadly not a lot of opportunities for wildlife conservation work for career switchers like myself in this country, so I'm taking a different approach and aiming to become a media advocate for conservation, by sharing incredible parts of nature with you here on YouTube. This video is just one idea that I've had for a series, highlighting the most overlooked animals in nature and helping kind of educate people on just how amazing these creatures can be. But I do have different kinds of series planned. I'm just going to be focusing on what makes X animal awesome to kind of get into the swing of things and streamline the video making process. So please, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more, do all of that typical YouTube stuff. Like the video, share it with your friends, leave a comment if you want to contribute to the discussion, and if you're interested in seeing more, please be sure to subscribe to the channel so that you can see what I post next. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all again very shortly.